Good afternoon, everyone. We're here today with Joe. Joe is an enterprise performance management professional specializing in Hyperion planning, financial data management, and Oracle S-Base. He's a senior consultant over at the Bean Consulting Group. Joe has nearly 10 years of experience in management and leadership, financial modeling, and strategic planning and budgeting and forecasting. Thank you, Joe, for your time today.
Hope everybody's doing well out there. Today we're going to be covering HFR. I'm mostly going to focus on tips and tricks on building dynamic financial reports and being able to build reports that use objects, build report butterfly income statements. We're going to look at some rolling forecasts and using functions, test functions. So to give you a little bit of background on our company, I'm a senior consultant with the Bean Consulting Group, as Melissa had mentioned. We are an Oracle Hyperion EPM shop. We tend to focus on business intelligence and the Hyperion suite products. We also work with some master data management. Work with, hey Melissa, do you want to start that over?
Let's just start it over. Okay, so stop recording.
Yeah, let me see if I can change my, okay.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'm here to introduce Joe. Joe is an enterprise performance management professional specializing in Hyperion planning, financial data management, and Oracle S-Base. He's a senior consultant at the Bean Consulting Group. Joe has nearly 10 years of experience in management and leadership, financial modeling, and strategic planning and budgeting and forecasting. Thank you, Joe, for your time today.
Good evening, all. I hope you're enjoying your day. Today we're going to be talking about tips and tricks on building dynamic financial reports, specifically related to HFR Studio. That's Hyperion Financial Reporting Studio. We're going to look at some things like objects, butterfly reports. We're going to look at some rolling forecasts, and we're going to look at using text functions and saved objects and references. So a little bit about our group. The name of the company is the Bean Consulting Group. We are an Oracle Hyperion EPM suite company. We are S-Base specialized and planning specialized. All our consultants are Oracle implementation specialists, S-Base specialists, and planning specialists. We also work with Hyperion Financial Data Quality Management, which is FDM. We also do some master data management. We work with some business intelligence suites such as ODI, DRM, and OBIE for reporting. Some of our industry verticals include higher education, utilities, healthcare, telecommunications. We've also done a lot of work with government and some projects related to governments as well, and PSPB. So to give you an overview of what we're going to cover today, we're going to look at HFR, and this overview is going to be based on 11.122. We're going to also look at best practices. We're going to look at some functions, which include text functions, math functions, and member references. We're going to look at some report objects and saved objects. And again, we're going to discuss butterfly reports and multiple ways of building those reports. We're going to look at a couple of different ways of building rolling reports, such as a rolling balance sheet. And we're going to look at some of the new HFR enhancements that have recently been made. So let's start with an overview of HFR. Really what it does is it enables highly formatted financial reports. One of its qualities is that you can build a report and run the report, and it'll be just like it'll pull data, it'll pull recent data because it pulls off of S-Base, but it'll be fully formatted, so you don't have to worry about having it formatted every time. I would like to clarify that HFR is a reporting tool. A lot of people try to use SmartView as a reporting tool, but SmartView is more of an ad hoc tool, and HFR is more of a reporting tool. And one of the major differences is the formatting of the ability to format the HFR reports. Now, some of the key features are there. You have generally accepted accounting principles compliant. GAAP is a common set of accounting principles and standards and procedures used to compile financial statements. And it basically has 7 basic objects that HFR helps companies meet. It's also XBLR support, which is XBLR is the financial and operational business reporting offshoot of XML. And it's used to electronically exchange business information. This is very important because publicly traded companies who have to comply with SEC regulations, they require XBLR reporting for interactive data reporting. Again, it stands for Extensible Business Reporting Language. And there's broad application support, so you can connect to financial management Hyperion Planning, or Essbase. Now, I've been asked multiple times if you can connect to other relational databases, and to the best of my knowledge, you can't. The only three connections you can actually have in a grid for HFR are these three: financial management, planning, and Essbase. So some of the key benefits is you can have automated report delivery. You have a lot of flexibility with your formatting. You can do conditional formatting or just regular formatting, static formatting. You have various function capabilities. As I mentioned, you have member functions, text functions, mathematical functions. Now we're going to discuss functions and when to use them in HFR and when you should actually have them in Essbase. Most of the functions that you're going to write, especially mathematical functions, you're going to want them to be in Essbase for performance reasons, and we'll talk about that. You have reusable content, such as saved objects. You can reduce maintenance using this reusable content, and you can build a lot of reports using reusable objects, which we'll talk about. And you have timely and accurate data access, meaning that the report itself doesn't house the data. The report itself points to an intersection of data, which is housed inside of Essbase. So in that aspect, you're going to have the most recent data possible that's housed in your Essbase database, in your queue. So some of the advantages to HFR are end user accessibility. So end users actually access reports through Workspace and through Explorer in Workspace. Then another advantage is you can have PDF or HTML outputs. You can also export reports out to Microsoft Office, so you can export the report into Excel. The good thing about HFR is the one version of truth. Now this mostly holds static with Essbase because you're pulling all your data from one source. As I mentioned, it's just pointing to an intersection of data, but all the data is housed in Essbase. So whether you pull the data through planning or you pull the data through HFR or SmartView, you're getting one source of truth. You're not getting multiple data points as if you were using a lot of different Excel templates. You're actually just pulling data from one place. And you can create books. It's really easy to create books. Like if you have a book because you have board books that you have to create, or you have a budget you have to create, like the governor's budget, you can create a book in HFR, and it's a compilation of a number of different reports. With these books, you can also add other documents such as PDFs and Microsoft Office documents, such as Word documents or Excel documents. So some of the limitations to HFR: you don't really have any modifications from end users. There's no ad hoc or freeform capabilities, meaning it's not like SmartView, as we were mentioning earlier. It's not meant to answer a particular business question at a given point in time. It's made for reporting. You see I have in here, you can't change formatting. What I mean by that is the end users themselves can't change the formatting. So if an end user or if you have a budget administrator getting in to run a report and they see that some formatting is wrong or something, they actually got to get a hold of the reports manager, the person that's actually handling the reports, or the developer of the reports, and get them to actually fix formatting. That's why I also have developer determines visibility, because you can have security on it, and the developer also determines the formatting. So you'd have to get a hold of the developer to change security or formatting. There's no data submission to Essbase or planning. A lot of people see that with SmartView, you can actually go in and enter data and submit it back to Essbase, or submit it to planning. Well, with HFR, you can't do that because, again, it's not interactive. One of the biggest things is there's no undo or redo option. So if you're in Studio and you're working on a report and you make a mistake or something happens, you can't undo that. Then you can't redo that. You have to close the report and reopen the latest version you have, or if you saved it, you're going to have to go back and delete what you did. I also have different versions with different challenges. I put this in there because I've seen a lot of different bugs with HFR depending on the actual version with it. There was one version that we used where when we were building a butterfly report, we couldn't, for whatever reason, we weren't able to move the header section. It wouldn't allow us to move the header section in front of any of the other columns. And I'm not quite sure why, but we opened Oracle SR4. A couple other ones, the text functions weren't working correctly, and I've also seen it to where some of the math functions didn't work properly either. So we're going to talk about some best practices. So the way I this is how I kind of view best practices. I view it as a commitment to leverage all knowledge, technology, and support to ensure success. The reason I put this in there is because it's important to understand when you're building the report, you need to build it with your client in mind. You need to build it so that way it's easy to maintain, it answers the questions they need, and it can improve on quality and improve the functionality of what's occurring. The thing to remember about this is it's always evolving, and best practices are always open for improvement. What's best practice today may not be best practice tomorrow. So you got to keep your mind open. You got to keep moving forward. So one of the things I think is really important that I've seen over time is that you need to manage your repository. It's best to build out a repository structure before building out the reports. This is mostly important when you're relating or when you're talking about books. And the reason being is because if you were to create a book and you refer to all these reports or these documents and you change your folder structure and you start moving reports around, or your books are no good anymore. So you're going to have to redo your books. You have to rebuild them, essentially, is what it means. And if you move your saved objects and you have these saved objects linked, then those links are no good anymore. And that kind of defeats the purpose of having a saved object and linking them together, which we'll discuss a little bit later. So it's really important to manage your repository well and build out a really good report structure. And here the report structure I have is just basic. We have objects, templates, financial reports, management reports. That can change, but whatever you think. I think the two most common that you should have are objects and templates. So you want to create global objects. What this means is headers, grids, and images should all be global so they can be used across multiple reports. That way, if you want to change the header in one report, it can change across all reports you have it linked to. Same thing with some of your grids and your images. So benefits. This will drive efficiency and it'll improve development because when you're actually, again, when you got to update something, if you could update it in one place and it'll update across 10 reports, it's the best way you can do it. And with that, it also reduces maintenance. So you want to design manageable components. I put this in here because I've seen a lot of headers that have been hard-coded, and you really should have formulas in your headers so that way they're dynamic. You should be pulling the report name for your header, or you should be pulling the current date for the header, or whatever the case may be, but you should have functions in there as opposed to hard-coding them. Grids, I've seen reports with a lot of different grids, and the problem when you have multiple grids in one report is it can take a while to run for one, but for two, it takes a lot of maintenance because when you got to update those grids, you got to update all of them in that report, and that can create kind of a mess with maintenance. And the charts, I've seen some really large charts which created a lot of problems. So you want your charts to be kind of limited on their size. You want them to be to where they can come up and you could see the whole chart within the window frame. And we'll talk about this more when we get into some of the enhancements with HFR. The other thing you want to do is you want to set general preferences in workspace. All your preferences set for planning HFR are going to be done in workspace. Two of the preferences you want to set for HFR would be your default preview mode, meaning that you can automatically open it in PDF as opposed to opening it in HTML. And that's important because you don't really see formatting in PDF. You only see you can only see the formatting in PDF. You can't see it in HTML. And you also want to set the user point of view. And that's so when they run the report, they can actually see what they want to look for, the members they want to see. So some of your functions, you want to use member functions, text functions, and the current keyword. Now the current keyword is only good with text functions, and we'll look at this a little bit later, and member functions. I put that you want to restrict math functions, and the reason why is because if you have too many functions, too many math functions within HFR, it can really slow your retrieve and your calculations, and it's less versatile. So if you have a lot of math functions in your reports, when you got to update that, you got to update those math functions in all those reports. Now, if you can have that function built into S-Base, that'll be a lot better because your report will run a lot quicker, and you can just change that function in one place, and it'll reflect through all the reports that it's referenced. That leads us to the next slide for calculations in S-Base. So you can do a number of different calculations within HFR Studio. But the problem with that is it processes against the report server instead of processing against S-Base. So I put in here, want to have calculations built into S-Base. You have quicker processing. Again, that's more manageable because you have your formulas in one place as opposed to having them in a bunch of different reports. So you want to use your grid POV. This is really important because it actually allows your point. It kind of acts as page members, but instead of indexing every page, it runs much faster because it's not actually indexing each page when it processes. When you use page members, it actually indexes every page. In most cases, the POV can be set up just as the page members are. So, and you won't have the processing lag if you do that. So you want to consider the report requirements when you start developing the cube. I've seen a lot of times when the cubes start getting developed and they start building out the outlines, but they actually haven't looked at the requirements of the report itself. And in the end, the idea is to build reports so that way that you can build typically some type of book, some type of budget book. Now you want to build your report based on the structure of your database outline, and that can have a huge impact on the structure of the report. You know, certain changes you need to make, which members you're going to pull in, functions that you might use. And when needed, you can use alternate hierarchies. Now, I kind of put in here that you should limit the number of alternate hierarchies you use, because if you use a lot of alternate hierarchies, that'll impact maintenance from the standpoint that when you're managing your database, when you're managing your cube, and you need to add a member, then you're going to have to make sure that member is added to all the alternate hierarchies that it's added to. And if you have too many alternate hierarchies, it can create some performance issues as well. In this case, what I put in here was formatting grid, was specifically talking about conditional formatting. I like conditional formatting. I think it's a really good tool to use, but I think it needs to be used sparsely. It can slow some report retrieval time, and you can't reuse it in templates. We're going to talk about templates here in a little bit and using templates, and you can't save a grid template if it has conditional formatting in it. So you kind of want to be careful with it. It'll also increase maintenance, because if you need to change the formatting, you have to change it for every cell or every column that has this conditional format. You can't just change all of them at once, and so that can really increase your maintenance as well. So one of the things I wanted to talk about was whether it's Essbase or Report Studio when you have a slow retrieval time. So a lot of times people will have a report that's running really, really slow, and they'll say, oh, well, it's got to be my Essbase structure. I need to do some Essbase tuning or something. Well, that might not be the case. You might have too many functions, maybe too many conditions. You might have too many grids, or there might be something wrong with your report. So a good way to test this is to do a retrieve in Smart View. If you do a retrieve in Smart View and it's quick, but you run a report and it's slow, then you know the problem is with your report, because your report's slow, Smart View is fast, so the retrieve from Essbase is not the problem. It's obviously your report that's the problem. But if you do a retrieve in Smart View and it tends to be slow, and you do a retrieve with your report and it's slow, then you might have to do some Essbase tuning, or if you get errors. Some of the things to consider with Essbase tuning is dense sparse configuration. Now, of course, this only applies to a BSO database. We don't have those in ASO. Store versus dynamic in some of your cache settings. You want to look at your cache settings. And one of the things I don't have in here, but it's important to remember, is some of your environment settings as well. You know, you want to set out your environment settings and your server settings, and check out some of your retries, and look at your configurations. So if it's a problem with Studio, you want to look at the number of functions you have. I've seen a lot of reports use page members that tend to be really slow, like we kind of talked about earlier, because it indexes every page. So you want to see how many number of page members you have. If you have too many, that could be a reason why it's slow. Or they could be too many rows. The number of rows that have members can be too large. So you want to be careful with that as well. So your report structure, some of the do's and don'ts. You want to use row and column functions. What that means is you want to use the whole row and column function as opposed to using the cell, instead of using cell functions. And the reason why is because it indexes faster and it calculates the calculations better. You want to use member functions. In this case, what that means is you can do children or descendants. You want to use functions such as that as opposed to calling in on individual members. It's a lot better, and it's a lot cleaner, and it's automatic. It'll automatically update when you update your outline, because you're looking at descendants as opposed to looking at the individual members. And you want to use reference arguments and properties. The first one you see is a reference argument. The second one you see is actually a function. The reason why you want to use a reference argument is because it calculates faster, because it's a reference as opposed to being a calculation instead of being a function. So it runs faster. Some of the don'ts is you don't want to have more than 2 sparse dimensions on the rows. This can create a lot of problems with your report, cause it to run really slow. You don't want to have too many page members, as we discussed earlier, and too many calculations. You kind of want to limit your calculations. Mostly in this, I mean, you want to limit your member calculation or your mathematical calculations. For your member formulas or your text functions, that's okay, but you don't want to have too many mathematical functions in your reports. It's best to handle those in your in Essbase if you can. So some of the functions, we're going to talk about functions now. So in overview, you can kind of create formulas using functions. You have member functions, test functions, and mathematical functions. The member functions, as I was mentioning, I call them member functions. What it is, it's your descendants, your children, your ancestors, so on and so forth. Your text functions are going to be like your grid name, your header, things like that. And your mathematical functions are your sums, averages, I think they have a division, things like that. So some of the benefits to using some of these functions is they reduce maintenance. As I mentioned, if you use a member function, then when you add a member to your outline, you don't have to add it in your report because it automatically pulls it through. Improves performance because these functions, when you use them, it's going to be pulling all the children, so it's going to be updating automatically and it'll run quicker. And it increases functionality. In this case, when you use text functions, if you use those in the headers or if you would use those in your grids, it would pull through the names that you actually have because you're referencing a member name or you're referencing an alias or something along those lines. So some of the useful member functions, as I kind of mentioned earlier, was descendants, relative member, range, and dynamic time series. I chose these four mostly in part because we're going to be talking to them and how they relate to being able to build a butterfly income statement or build a rolling balance sheet, which we're going to look at a little bit later. So to use descendants, this allows you to build management. When you're building management reports, the good thing about this is you can call on descendants. In this case, a total operating expense, meaning that if I were to add a child under total operating expense, it would automatically pull through in my report. And you can see here, as opposed to having 20 rows, I only have one row because it's a function that pulls it through. Relative member, this is great for building a rolling balance sheet where the fiscal year is different than the calendar year. And what that means is that you might have a fiscal year that's January to January or something along those lines. Instead of January to December, you might have July to June or something along those lines. So the range, to build the roll with this one, for the range, you would actually have to have your calendar year being the same. The good thing about the range that's different than the relative member is that you only really have to have two columns to build out a rolling balance sheet. And the reason being is because you could do a range from a month to a certain period, whereas in the relative member, you're just moving relative to whichever member you're looking at. So you would end up going 12 steps back, meaning that you go 12 months back. So you have to have more columns. So the different tools for different reasons. And dynamic time series, DTS, this is only used on the time dimension, and this allows you to do year-to-date income statements. So that way you can, and what we're going to look at is if you have a butterfly income statement, you might have your current values or your monthly values on the left, you might have your year-to-date values on the right. Well, this allows you to run year-to-date values and it automatically adds it up for you. So some of the useful text functions are member alias, member property, cell text, and current keyword or current. You can spell it out either way. Some useful math functions that I put in here is eval and percent of total. So member alias, what this does is it actually just pulls the alias for that member that you have. So the good thing about this is if you need to change a title or something, you can do it at the alias. And you can go into Essbase and just update the alias. It will automatically be updated in your report itself. You want to use this is used in text, or you can use it in your headers if you want to. Your member property, this is good for a number of different reasons. I've used it for UDAs. I've used it to pull comments through from Essbase. So in Essbase, you can add comments, and you can use this to actually pull comments through. We used that in a situation where we had an 80-character limit, or I should say the aliases have an 80-character limit, and the member alias we needed to be more than 80 characters, so we used the actual comment field, and we were able to pull it through in the report using the member property function. In this case, we're using it UDA, which is a member property. So style text is really, really good. You can retrieve annotations in planning. That's really what this is for. This is really built for planning. So you might want to make you may make an annotation planning in one of your intersections, one of your forms. You might make an annotation, and you might want to see that annotation. You might be putting in some type of budget justification, like a short budget justification. In that case, you can pull those through using cell text. And current keyword, what this does is it allows to be more dynamic and allows you to be less redundant. So in this case, if you wanted to pull through, you can just say current. And so what that does is that represents your row, right? So your column's going to be set to Q, but your row is going to change depending on where your formula is. So if you're using, say, a descendants function, member function, if you're using a descendants member function, you want to use current when you do cell text. And the reason being is because it's going to be one row. And if you were to put that row on there, it would only pull that one row. It would only pull row 2. But in this case, if you were to use descendants and you put current, then it would pull the cell text for each intersection for each one of those descendants. And that's why you want to use current. Eval is a good one. This is for embedded function arguments. For some reason, HFR runs into a problem when you have embedded function arguments. You can get a lot of errors with them, so you want to put eval in there instead. What I mean by that is if you're like, in this case, we're dividing 2 columns, and if I was doing that with the round, it would create a problem, right? Because that's an embedded function, L divide O, right? Column L divide O, and we're trying to round that. It'll create a problem. So what eval does is it makes it a value, is what it does. It evaluates it, is what it stands for, evaluation. And what it does is it evaluates the function, so that way the round can actually round that calculation. Percent of total is a really good function. I've always liked it. I've used it a lot because sometimes I ran into problems running percent of total or building that calculation into S-base for whatever reasons. So one of the things I found was I was able to use it pretty easily in HFR using the percent of total. It's a good function. It's just like it sounds. It gives you the percent of total. And it's a pretty good calculation. So some of your report objects. Report objects include grids, images, charts, and text boxes. So some of your components, when you're designing your reports, you want to keep in mind. Again, you don't want to have too many grids. Some of your images, if they're changing, you want to be careful with those. And you want to make sure your images are stored in your repository in a common place so you can always use them. You can also insert new or previously saved report objects. That's what we're going to kind of talk about next. What this does is if you link those objects or you save those objects, you can reuse them. And the good thing about that is if they're in one central location like in your repository, then you're going to only be using the same objects for all your reports, which is better for maintenance and functionality. So saved objects, what we talked about before, one of the most important things you want to remember in this is you're going to have to link it. You want to make sure it's linked, and the reason why is because if you don't link it, then when you update it in its original place, it's not going to update through all the reports that it's inserted in. So when you save them, you want to save them in the repository, as we talked about. You want to save them in a place that you can reuse. You don't want to move those saved objects after you've built them and saved them in the repository. And the reason being is because your link gets broke if you do that. This will minimize complexity, and it definitely reduces maintenance, because if you have a report header that changes, say your company merges with another company and you need to change your name, or you need to change the name of the report, or whatever the case may be, you can change it in one report heading and it'll change across all your report headings that it's linked to. So some of the objects to save are common images. So logos are really popular. Headers, footers. So headers and footers tend to be pretty universal across reports. The only thing that's different is with your headers is usually the report name. Your footers are usually your page numbers. You might have dates, times, things like that in your footers, or you might have disclosure statements or something like that. And so you'd want to be able to save that as an object. Certain report information like who created it, when it was last updated, when it was last modified, or something along those lines. And any common grids. If you have a grid that you use multiple times, it's good to save that, because then you always have the same intersection. So saving report objects. I'm going to walk you through how you would actually go through and save them. First, you would actually click your object, and you would right click on your object, and you would choose Saved Object. This is the first one. In this case, I'm showing an example of doing a header. You can see on the header I have report name as a function, and I'm also using member alias. Once you right-click on it and you click Save Object, you'll be prompted with a box where you want to save it. Right? This is your repository and where you want to save it in your repository. One of the important things to remember here is you got to make sure that link to source object at the bottom is checked. If that's not checked, then your actual object won't be dynamic, meaning that if I were to change this header here and then I inserted it in other reports, it won't change in those other reports if I don't link it to the source object. So really it's important to understand that if you really want to have a header that you can change in one spot and have it reflected through all other reports, you want to make sure that link to source object is checked. So inserting an object, once you have a saved object, if you want to insert it, what you want to do is you want to go to Insert. You can click Saved Object. I think it's about the fourth one down, fifth fifth one down. And what you want to do is you want to make sure you choose the correct object type. I've seen in different situations where they say, oh, well, I can't find my saved object, I can't find my image, I can't find my logo or something along those lines. And the reason why is because they're looking for the wrong type. If you save a text, right, like we're talking about a header, if you save that as a text, and if you choose type for grid, you're not going to see that come up as an option to insert. So you would have to go down, select text, and then you'll see your saved objects appear, and then you can insert it. So to build a butterfly income statement, there's two ways you can really build a butterfly income statement. You can either move the header, or you could do a multi-grid income statement. Best way to do this is to move the header. That's the best way to go about building a butterfly income statement. However, there's certain instances, as I mentioned earlier, where you might run into a problem with this functionality. I ran into this problem with this functionality for a particular client, and we still had to build the report out. So what we did was we used multiple grids. So to be able to do this, you would create your grid. You would want to define all your intersections, build out all your functions, everything that you have in place. Once your grid's created, you want to highlight your grid, which is usually done at the top left corner of that grid. And when you do that, you want to go to your grid properties, which usually populates at the right side. If it's not, you can go up to the top and click View, and then on View you can click Grid Properties. Under Grid Properties, under General, you're going to you see a section that says Headings. Now, the headings refer to the headings are the far left side of your grid. So it's the members that you put that are on your rows. So in this case, we have business units and accounts that are on our rows. Those are going to be our headings in this case. So where it says row headings before, you want to put it to where you want it to come before. In this case, what we have is A through H are all monthly values, right? It's current point of view for year, and it's the current month that you're in. Well, everything from I on is year to date, right? So on the left side, we're going to have current month. On the right side, we're going to have year to date, and we want to put the accounts in the center. So what we want to do is we want to move our row headings, which is the accounts, in front of I. Now, keep in mind, this is going to remove both business units and accounts before I. It's not just the accounts headings. So in this case, what I did was I hid the business unit heading, and I just showed the account heading. Once you do that, one of the important things to remember is you want to set the width to your page, right? Because if this goes over onto another page, then that can create another problem, and it does that often, especially if you're moving a row heading. So what you want to do is you want to go to Page Setup, click File, go to Page Setup, and you want to fit your width to page. Now, one of the things I've seen with this is if you do fit width to page and fit length to page, you can run into some problems. So typically, you want to just do width to page and let the length run on. And you can actually choose to have your heading on each page, so you can do that as well too. And then from there, you want to save it. Once you do that, your report should look like this. You'll have all your monthly values on the left, and then you'll have all your year-to-date values on the right. So we're going to talk about rolling report next, how to build a 13-month rolling balance sheet. In this case, we're going to look at the fiscal year as the same as the calendar year. In this aspect, you can actually use the range function that we talked about earlier, and you want to use that with current member. And you'll have two dimensions. You'll end up having period and years, right? If you had the same fiscal, if your fiscal year was different than a calendar year, you would really only have one dimension. If it was just an S-based application, obviously, if you have a planning application, you have to have both period and years. So if you want to build a rolling report and you only want to do it in 2 columns, you would create out your grid, and what you would do is in grid 1, what you'd want is you want your periods dimension in the columns, and you'd also want your years there as well. So in your first column, you would have current POV for years, right? Because you want the current point of view for years. In other words, you want it on your column, but you want the user to be able to select it, right? So what this does is it actually puts the years inside the column, but allows the user to select which year they want to see. In the second column, you want relative to current point of view for years, and you want to offset that by 1. If you remember what we were talking about, the relative function moves it by 1. So what this does is it's going to move it back 1, or move it up 1. In this case, it'll move it up 1, right? So it'll look at what the current year is in column A. So if that's 12, it'll automatically put 13 in C, right? Because it's offsetting it by 1, because in our hierarchy, we would have fiscal year 12 and then fiscal year 13. Once you set that, you'd want to double-click on the periods, where the periods dimension is. Once that comes up, you want to go to your functions. Typically, you come up with it'll show you members. You see the tabs at the top in your Select Members dialog box. You want to go to the far right. That'll be your functions. It's probably about 12 or 13 down. It's towards the bottom, but you want to select the range function. From there, once you click on it, on the range function, you want to click the arrow that's in the center there, the blue arrow that's highlighted. When you click that arrow, you'll get the Edit Range Function dialog box will populate up. With this, what it's looking for is it's looking for a start member and an end member. Now, the reason it does that is because you're telling it you want a range of members, right? So you need to tell it which members you want, right? It needs to know when it's going to start and when it's going to end. So what you want to do is you click Start Member in the value box, and you'll get a little eyeglass that pops out at the far right of that value box. Once you click on that, you'll get the edit member parameter values. And with this, what we're going to want is current point of view for period, right? Because we want the end user or the person running the report. We want them to be able to select the period, and we want to be able to make this dynamic based on whichever period they select. So we want to do current point of view for period, and we're going to add that to the right. Now for the end, we're going to choose December, right? Because if they want to see the period and say it's October, we want to only show October through December, right? If they say May, we want to show May through December. So what we want to do for end members, we would click the eyeglass piece, and then we would choose December and put December as the ending range for the end. Okay. So what that'll do is that'll give us from the current point of the current month, right, to the end of December for that year that they selected. Okay. Now you want to repeat that for the second column, but for your start member, you want to select January, and for end member, you want to do current point of view for period. Now what this means is that they're going to pick one member for current point of view, so say they pick October, right? In column A, we're going to have October through December for fiscal year 12, okay? And in C, we're going to have January through October for fiscal year 13. So what we do is we have a rolling balance sheet that gives us from October to December and from January to October. So it gives us a full 12 months, right? But it's constantly updating depending on what the selection is because we use current point of view. If you look here, we're actually using October as an example. We're using October through 13 through October 14. And you can see that it'll be dynamic and it'll be updating as you change it, depending on the selection from the end user. So some of the enhancements, I wanted to kind of touch on this a little bit. Some of the ones I think are really, really cool. One of the ones I liked a lot was you can add a cover page to the books. So if you look at book enhancements down there, I put in there that you can, before the table of contents, you can actually put in a cover page. That's really important because you couldn't do that before. You would have your table of contents and then you can add pages afterwards in your book, but you couldn't do it before. And a lot of times for a book, especially a board book, they have the company logo or they might have a brief summary or something, you know, a couple of kind of an executive summary. So it's great to be able to have that. You can also do embedded Word documents, which is pretty cool. And you can specify the book starting page where you couldn't do that before. Another cool thing too, I kind of like it. I've seen some issues with it just because it's still a new feature. But in 1, 2, 3, you can actually view financial reports and interact with them and run charts and stuff through your iPhone, iPad, or tablets. Now the reason I'm saying that is because I've seen it to where the chart wouldn't resize or you know, it would end up crashing, or the reports would take too long to run, or something along those lines, or the report wasn't sized right. So, you know, I think it needs a little bit more work. But I think it's a pretty cool feature, and you know, I think it'll be really nice once they get all the bugs worked out of it. You can launch reports and books in HTML or PDF, which is really cool. You can change out your POV. Change page universe is huge, and you can use your expansions. You can do all this with your mobile support, right? This is all mobile support, which is very important because you couldn't do that before. It's not just running the report, but you can actually dynamically work with that report as well. And some of the design enhancements here, you can have custom text colors. You couldn't do that before. And you can have auto sizings for headers and text boxes for the PDF output. So you wouldn't have auto sizing for PDF, and now you can. You can select it to auto size for a PDF. And these are all with level 1, 2, 3. So there's a little information on our company. We're the Bean Consulting Group again. You can reach us at our website at thebean.co. We have a blog, thebean.co/blog. If you have any questions or you're interested in more information about our company, you can always reach out to our Director of Business Development, Jim Raybrock. His email and phone are listed there. And if you'd like to contact me or have any questions for me or you need anything at all, please feel free to contact me. My email is there. I'm also on LinkedIn. You can look me up and request me as a colleague I'll accept. And that's the end of the session. Is there any questions I can help with or I can answer?
Thank you, Joe. That was very insightful. There are a couple of questions that are coming in. The first one looks like, is there a solution to save the prompt selections for a user? My understanding is that there only could be one defined in a FR Studio, but a user would need to change them every time he or she runs the report.
Okay, yeah, I think I understand your question correctly. Yeah, you can do that. That's through the user preferences we talked about earlier. We kind of briefly covered it. I know I didn't go into too much depth, but if you were to go into user preferences, when you're on Workspace, you want to go to File, and you can click on Preferences. And inside of Preferences, you'll have, on the left-hand side, you'll have something called Financial Reporting. You'll have two tabs once you open that up. You'll have a General and a Reporting Studio tab. With that, what you can do is change your user POV preview to on. So a lot of times this is defaulted to off, and you want it to on. And what that means is that it'll prompt the user or it'll allow the user to change their POV when they run a report. Users can also predefine members through the setup members. So there's a section in there where you can do setup members, and if you click on that, you can predefine the members that you want to see for any report that you want to run. And in that case, that's how you can actually prompt the user for a selection. You can also do prompts in HFR Studio, but it depends on what you want to do. You can do a prompt to have the user select whatever member you want, but in this case, I think you're more or less referring to the preferences.
Okay, great. Looks like there's one other question. In Workspace, when drilling down in a report and changing one member, the report collapses again. Is it possible to keep the report expanded when changing a parameter?
Yeah. If I understand your question correctly, I think you're talking about expansions in Studio and HFR. There's a new feature. It's called expansions, and what you can do is you can allow expansions. Now, in other words, what that means is if you're using a member function, as we talked about, like descendants of a particular, say you do descendants of period, so you're going to see all your quarters and all your months, right? If you do that, you want to make sure that your allow expansions is unchecked if you don't want it to be collapsing. So in other words, if you don't want it to come to your total and then you have to expand it out, right, you want to take that allow expansions off. So you can find that in your heading column properties. If you click on your heading column properties, you'll see your headings, and in there you'll see allow extensions about midway through, but you'll have to select the dimension for that, and you want to take off allow extensions. So, and that's the way you can drill down on the report without having it collapse again when you change the parameter.
Awesome, thank you, Joe. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions come in at this time, but if you think of any later, feel free to reach out to us. Our contact information is listed. Thank you for your time, Joe, and everyone have a good day.